Even after I saved 12 lives in the Afghan mountains, Marcus still called me his little sister playing soldier. The way he said it, with that smirk that had been annoying me since childhood, made my jaw clench every single time. But that morning, standing in my dress blues at our father's retirement ceremony, I had no idea that everything was about to change. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auditorium at Fort Braxton was packed wall to wall with decorated officers, their wives in their finest dresses, and children squirming in uncomfortable chairs. Dad's retirement after 37 years of service was the kind of send-off that legends received. Colonel Daniel Morrison had commanded respect from everyone who ever served under him, led 3 successful deployments, and earned enough ribbons to make a Christmas tree jealous. The man was military royalty, and everyone in that room knew it. Everyone except me, apparently, still saw little Sophia Morrison, the girl who used to follow her big brother around the base housing, begging to be included in his games of war with the neighborhood kids. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one who inherited Dad's commanding presence and natural leadership qualities. At 28, he was already a major in the Army Rangers, fast-tracked for colonel before his 35th birthday, with a chest full of commendations that made Dad beam with pride every time someone mentioned his son's name. I was 25, a staff sergeant in the Marines, and apparently still invisible. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Marcus had spent most of his military career in comfortable positions stateside, coordinating logistics and training new recruits, I had volunteered for 3 combat deployments. But somehow, in Dad's eyes, Marcus was the real soldier, the son who would carry on the Morrison military legacy, the one who understood what it meant to serve with honor. Marcus leaned over to me as we sat in the front row, his voice low enough that Mom couldn't hear. "Try not to look so serious, Soph. People might think you actually belong here." His grin was wide and practiced, the same one he'd used since we were kids whenever he wanted to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. I kept my eyes forward, watching Dad shake hands with General Patterson on the stage. "I do belong here, Marcus." "Sure you do. Playing nurse to a bunch of Marines overseas really prepared you for real military ceremony." He chuckled at his own joke, completely missing the way my mother shot him a warning glance. Mom had always been caught in the middle of our sibling dynamics. Linda Morrison was a military wife through and through, someone who understood the sacrifices and the honor that came with the uniform. But she also understood her children, probably better than Dad ever had. She knew that Marcus's confidence sometimes crossed the line into arrogance, and she knew that my quiet determination masked something deeper than Dad ever bothered to investigate. "Marcus, that's enough," she whispered sharply, but he was already turning his attention back to the ceremony, satisfied that he'd gotten under my skin once again. The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you eventually stop trying to prove yourself to the people who refuse to see you. I had learned that lesson the hard way, watching Dad's face light up whenever Marcus called home with news of a promotion or a new assignment, while my own achievements were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. When I told them I was volunteering for my first deployment to Afghanistan, Dad had actually tried to talk me out of it. "The Marines are different from the Army, Sophia. It's more dangerous, more unpredictable. Maybe you should consider a position here on base, something in communications or administration. Let the boys handle the combat roles." Let the boys handle it, as if my gender automatically disqualified me from serving my country with the same dedication and courage that ran in our family's blood. As if the months of training, the physical conditioning, the mental preparation meant nothing because I didn't have the right chromosomes to be taken seriously. But I went anyway. 3 tours, each one teaching me something new about myself, about leadership, about what it really meant to serve something bigger than your own ego. I learned to make life-or-death decisions in split seconds, to earn the respect of Marines who initially saw me as just another female trying to prove herself in a man's world, to push through exhaustion and fear and doubt because lives depended on my ability to do my job. Marcus learned to coordinate supply chains and train new recruits in the safety of American soil. General Patterson's voice boomed across the auditorium, pulling me back to the present moment. Colonel Morrison's leadership has been exemplary, his dedication unwavering, and his impact on this institution immeasurable. Today, we honor not just his service, but the legacy he leaves behind. Dad stood straighter at those words, and I caught the slight smile that crossed his face. Legacy. That word had always been important to him, the idea that what he built would continue long after he hung up his uniform. In his mind, that legacy lived in Marcus, in the son who followed his path and would someday command the same respect he had earned. The ceremony continued with the traditional speeches, the presentation of honors, the formal transfer of command. I sat through it all with the practiced patience of someone who had attended dozens of military functions, but my mind kept wandering to a different kind of ceremony, one that had taken place 8 months earlier in a small forward operating base in the mountains of Afghanistan. Operation Nightfall had been my idea from the beginning. Intelligence had indicated that a group of American contractors were being held in a remote compound about 30 miles north of our position, deep in Taliban-controlled territory. The terrain was brutal, all sharp rocks and narrow passages that made conventional rescue operations nearly impossible. Command had been debating options for weeks, considering airstrikes, negotiating with local tribal leaders, even the possibility of paying ransom. I had studied the satellite images until I could navigate that mountain range in my sleep. I knew every ridge, every valley, every possible approach route. More importantly, I knew that while everyone else was looking for the obvious solution, the one that followed protocol and minimized risk, those contractors were running out of time. Captain Rodriguez had been skeptical when I first presented my plan. Morrison, this is suicide. You're talking about a 12-person extraction team hiking through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan at night with no air support and minimal backup. If anything goes wrong, we lose the team and the hostages. Sir, with respect, if we don't try something soon, we lose the hostages anyway. The intel suggests they're planning to move them within the next 48 hours. Once they disappear into the cave systems further north, we'll never find them. And you think you can just walk in there and walk out with 12 people? This isn't a video game, Sergeant Morrison. I had spread the topographic maps across his desk, pointing to the route I had identified. It's not walking, sir, it's climbing. The compound sits on a plateau that's accessible from the south through conventional routes, which is why it's heavily guarded. But there's a rock face on the north side that leads directly to their perimeter. It's a technical climb, maybe a 5-7 rating, but it's doable with the right team. Rodriguez had stared at the maps for a long time, and I could see him weighing the options. The official recommendation from higher command was to wait for a larger operation, something that could involve air support and overwhelming force. But waiting meant those contractors might disappear forever, and Rodriguez knew it. You've done climbs like this before? Yes, sir. Grew up in Colorado, been climbing since I was 12. Did advanced mountaineering training at the Army Mountain Warfare School last year. I know the team members who have the skills for this.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And if it goes wrong? I had looked him directly in the eyes. Then it goes wrong trying, sir, but doing nothing guarantees failure. He approved the mission that same day. The team I assembled was small but highly specialized. Corporal Jackson, a former park ranger from Montana who could navigate mountain terrain blindfolded. Lance Corporal Patel, whose engineering background made him our go-to person for dealing with locks, alarms, and other technical obstacles. Sergeant Williams, a sniper whose steady hands and calm demeanor made him perfect for providing overwatch during the extraction. And 6 other Marines, each chosen for specific skills that would be essential for the mission's success. We spent 2 days rehearsing every aspect of the operation, using satellite photos and aerial reconnaissance to build a detailed model of the compound and surrounding area. Everyone knew their role, their backup role, and their backup to the backup role. We planned for equipment failures, injury scenarios, changes in weather, and the possibility that the hostages might not be in the condition to move quickly. The night of the operation, as we loaded our gear and prepared to move out, Rodriguez pulled me aside one final time. Morrison, I want you to know that I'm putting my career on the line for this. If it succeeds, you get the credit. If it fails, I take the blame. But I need you to promise me that you'll make the right call if things go sideways out there. Don't let pride or stubbornness put your team in unnecessary danger. Understood, sir. We'll bring them home. All of them, Morrison, the contractors and your team. Yes, sir. All of them. The hike to the compound took 6 hours, moving through terrain that would have been challenging in daylight with full visibility. In the darkness, relying on night vision goggles and hand signals, it felt like navigating an alien landscape. Every step had to be carefully placed, every movement calculated to avoid loose rocks or unstable ground that could send someone tumbling down a mountainside. But my team was solid. These weren't weekend warriors or newly minted Marines trying to prove themselves. They were experienced, disciplined professionals who understood that the mission came first, that personal discomfort and fear were luxuries they couldn't afford when lives were at stake. The climbing portion began at 0300 hours, scaling a nearly vertical rock face in complete darkness. I went first, setting the route and anchoring safety lines for the team to follow. The rock was cold and sharp, cutting through our gloves and leaving our hands bloody, but we moved steadily upward, one handhold at a time. Halfway up the face, Patel's equipment failed. Her night vision goggles went dark, leaving her effectively blind on a cliff face 300 feet above the valley floor. In training scenarios, this would have been the point where we aborted the mission, rappelled back down, and tried again another day. But those contractors didn't have another day. I climbed back down to her position, clipped my own safety line to her harness, and guided her up the remaining 150 feet by feel and whispered instructions. It took an extra hour, time we couldn't afford, but we made it to the top of the plateau with the team intact. The compound itself was exactly what the intelligence reports had described: a series of low buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, guarded by sentries who were more focused on the main access road than on the possibility of someone crazy enough to climb up the backside of a mountain. We neutralized the perimeter guards quietly, using techniques that would never make it into official after-action reports. Williams took position on the ridge overlooking the compound, providing overwatch while the rest of us moved toward the building where the contractors were being held. The door was locked, but Patel made quick work of it. Inside, we found 12 Americans in various states of physical and emotional distress, some injured, all terrified, but alive. The extraction itself took 20 minutes, gathering the contractors, conducting a quick medical assessment, distributing water and energy bars, and preparing them for the journey back down the mountain. That's when everything went wrong. The compound had some kind of silent alarm system that we hadn't detected during our reconnaissance. As we prepared to move out with the hostages, vehicles started arriving on the main access road. Not the small pickup trucks with a few guards that we had expected, but serious military vehicles with heavy weapons. We were trapped on a plateau with 12 civilians surrounded by hostile forces, with our only escape route requiring a technical descent that would be challenging even for experienced climbers. The contractors were in no condition to attempt that kind of operation, and we couldn't leave them behind. William's voice crackled through the radio. "Morrison, we've got at least 40 combatants surrounding the base of the cliff. They know we're up here, and they're setting up to wait us out." I made the call that would either save everyone or get us all killed. "Jackson, take half the team and start moving the contractors toward the alternate route. Patel, I need you to rig charges on the main access road. Bring down enough rock to block vehicle access for at least 12 hours. Williams, you and I are going to buy them time. Sarge, the alternate route is twice as long and leads through open ground. They'll pick us off before we make it halfway." Not if they're too busy dealing with us to organize a pursuit. This isn't a debate, Jackson. Move out. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in small unit tactics and personal survival. Williams and I held defensive positions on the plateau, using superior elevation and carefully placed shots to convince our attackers that they were facing a much larger force. Every time they tried to organize an assault up the main access road, we disrupted their formation. Every time they moved vehicles into position to provide covering fire, Patel's charges brought down enough rocks to force them to reposition. We weren't trying to win a conventional battle. We were trying to create enough chaos and confusion to give Jackson's team time to safety. It was a delaying action, the kind of tactical operation that military historians love to analyze, but no one wants to actually experience. By dawn, Jackson radioed that they had reached the extraction point where helicopters were waiting to take the contractors to safety.
Williams and I held the plateau for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, but our ammunition was running low and the enemy was finally getting organized enough to mount a serious assault. "Time to go, Morrison," Williams said, reloading his rifle for what felt like the 100th time. "Agreed, let's get out of here." The descent was a controlled fall down the backside of the mountain, rappelling through terrain that would have killed us if we had made a single mistake. By the time we reached the bottom, enemy forces were finally making it to the top of the plateau, but we were already moving toward our own extraction point. 12 contractors went home to their families that day. My entire team made it out alive. The mission was classified at a level that meant most of the details would never see the light of day, but the people who mattered knew what had happened. Rodriguez recommended me for the Silver Star. The citation read like something from a military thriller novel, full of phrases like extraordinary gallantry and conspicuous courage under fire. But what mattered more than the medal was the knowledge that we had accomplished something impossible through careful planning, precise execution, and the kind of teamwork that only comes from absolute trust in the people around you.
Marcus, of course, never heard the details. The official story was that I had participated in a successful rescue operation, nothing more. Dad received a letter from my commanding officer praising my leadership and dedication, but it was written in the kind of vague language that military bureaucracy requires for classified operations. To my family, I was still just Sophia Morrison, the daughter who had chosen a more dangerous branch of the military but hadn't really done anything noteworthy. Marcus continued to treat me like his little sister playing dress-up in a uniform, and Dad continued to focus his attention on his son's steady advancement through the ranks. But sitting in that auditorium, watching Dad receive the recognition he had earned through decades of dedicated service, I found myself thinking about legacy in a different way. Dad's legacy wasn't just about rank or position or the respect of his peers. It was about the values he had instilled in his children, even if he didn't always recognize how those values had manifested. Marcus had inherited Dad's confidence and natural leadership abilities, but he had also inherited his blind spots. He saw the military through the lens of career advancement and personal achievement, focusing on the visible markers of success rather than the substance of service. I had inherited something else: Dad's stubborn refusal to give up when something mattered, his ability to make hard decisions under pressure, and his belief that leadership meant taking responsibility for the people under your command. But unlike Marcus, I had learned these lessons in circumstances where failure meant death, not just a poor performance evaluation. General Patterson was introducing the final speaker of the ceremony, someone whose name I didn't recognize, but whose presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the auditorium. General Elizabeth Hartwell, commander of Special Operations Command, was a legend in military circles. The kind of officer whose career was built on operations that would never be fully declassified, whose reputation was based on results rather than publicity. She was also someone I had never met, though her signature was on the orders that had authorized Operation Nightfall. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Patterson announced, "General Hartwell has traveled here today specifically to honor Colonel Morrison's service and to recognize the legacy he leaves behind. General Hartwell." The applause was respectful but subdued. Most of the audience didn't know who she was or why her presence made this ceremony more significant than a typical retirement celebration. But I knew, and the knowledge made my stomach tighten with a mixture of anticipation and dread. General Hartwell approached the podium with the kind of measured confidence that comes from decades of making decisions that affect lives and national security. She was smaller than I had expected, probably no taller than my own 5'6" frame, but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem to tower over everyone in the room. "Colonel Morrison," she began, looking directly at Dad, "your service to this country has been exemplary. Your leadership, your dedication, and your commitment to excellence have set a standard that will inspire future generations of military professionals." Dad stood straighter, clearly moved by the recognition from such a high-ranking officer. This was the kind of moment he had dreamed of, validation from the highest levels of military leadership. "But today," General Hartwell continued, "I'm not here just to honor your service. I'm here to recognize something else, something that speaks to the values you instilled in your family and the legacy that will continue long after you hang up your uniform." She paused, letting her words settle over the auditorium, then turned to scan the front row where my family was seated. 8 months ago, 12 American civilians were taken hostage in Afghanistan. They were contractors working to build schools and medical clinics in remote areas, people who had volunteered to help rebuild a country torn apart by decades of war. Intelligence indicated they were being held in a location that conventional rescue operations couldn't reach. My mouth went dry. She was going to tell the story. Here, in front of my family, in front of Dad's retirement ceremony, she was going to reveal details of Operation Nightfall that I had assumed would remain classified forever. One member of the United States Marine Corps developed a rescue plan that most military strategists would have considered impossible, a plan that required technical climbing skills, intimate knowledge of mountain warfare, and the kind of tactical leadership that can only be developed through real combat experience. Marcus shifted in his seat beside me, probably wondering why a general was telling war stories at Dad's retirement ceremony. Mom leaned forward slightly, her attention completely focused on the speaker. Dad's expression was polite but confused, not yet understanding why this story was relevant to his own service. That Marine led a 12-person team up a vertical rock face in complete darkness into heavily defended enemy territory. When equipment failed and circumstances changed, that Marine adapted, improvised, and persevered. When the mission went sideways and the team was trapped with 12 civilians on a mountaintop surrounded by enemy forces, that Marine made the kind of decision that defines true leadership. General Hartwell's voice grew stronger, carrying easily to every corner of the auditorium. That Marine held defensive positions for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, buying time for the hostages to escape. 12 American civilians went home to their families that day because one Marine refused to accept that the mission was impossible. She turned to look directly at me, and I felt every eye in the auditorium following her gaze. Staff Sergeant Sophia Morrison, would you please stand? The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel Marcus's shock, Mom's sudden understanding, Dad's complete bewilderment. Slowly, on legs that felt disconnected from my body, I stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, General Hartwell announced, I present to you the recipient of the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States, Staff Sergeant Sophia Morrison, United States Marine Corps. The applause started slowly, a few people in the back of the auditorium who understood what they were hearing. Then it built, spreading through the crowd like a wave, until the entire auditorium was on its feet, giving me a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. But I wasn't looking at the crowd. I was looking at my family. Mom was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had always believed in me, always supported my military career, even when Dad questioned my choices, but even she hadn't known the full extent of what I had accomplished. Marcus looked like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, his confident demeanor completely shattered. For the first time in our lives, he was seeing me not as his little sister, but as a soldier who had accomplished something he could never have imagined. And Dad was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not pride, not yet, but something deeper. Recognition. Understanding. The sudden realization that he had been fundamentally wrong about his daughter's capabilities and character. General Hartwell wasn't finished. The citation for Staff Sergeant Morrison's Silver Star reads in part, her exceptional leadership, tactical brilliance, and unwavering commitment to the mission resulted in the successful rescue of 12 American civilians from enemy captivity. Her actions reflect the highest credit upon herself, the Marine Corps, and the United States Armed Forces. She paused, letting the words sink in. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here because Staff Sergeant Morrison represents something that Colonel Morrison has spent his entire career building, a military professional who understands that service is not about personal glory or career advancement. It's about making the hard choices, taking the difficult risks, and putting the mission and the people under your command ahead of your own safety and comfort. General Hartwell stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward me. The auditorium fell silent again, everyone watching as she approached. Staff Sergeant Morrison, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silence, it is an honor to meet you. She extended her hand, and I shook it, feeling the firm grip of someone who had spent her career making decisions that mattered. The honor is mine, ma'am. Your commanding officer speaks very highly of you.
Captain Rodriguez recommended you for immediate promotion to gunnery sergeant, with a path toward warrant officer designation if you're interested in pursuing advanced leadership roles.
I glanced at Dad, who was still staring at me with that expression of dawning understanding. I'm honored by the recommendation, ma'am. I serve wherever the Corps needs me. General Hartwell smiled, the kind of expression that suggested she had been hoping for exactly that answer. Outstanding. We need more leaders like you, Staff Sergeant. Leaders who understand that real strength comes from lifting others up, not from putting them down. She turned to address the entire auditorium again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what legacy looks like. Not just in the individual achievements of any one person, but in the values passed down from one generation to the next. Colonel Morrison, you should be extraordinarily proud of the daughter you raised. The applause started again, but this time it felt different, more personal, more meaningful. These weren't just people clapping for a military ceremony. They were recognizing something deeper about service, about family, about what it really meant to wear the uniform. As General Hartwell returned to the podium to conclude the ceremony, I remained standing, looking at my family. Mom was still crying, but she was smiling too, the kind of expression that comes from seeing your child recognized for who they really are. Marcus was slowly beginning to process what he had just heard, his shock giving way to something that might have been respect. And Dad stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and formal. Then, in front of the entire auditorium, he saluted me. Not the casual, familial gesture of a father acknowledging his daughter, but the precise, respectful salute of one military professional honoring another. I returned the salute, feeling tears I hadn't expected start to blur my vision. When the ceremony finally ended and people began to file out of the auditorium, my family remained in their seats, as if none of us were quite sure how to process what had just happened. Dad was the first to speak. "Sophia," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it, "I owe you an apology." "Dad, you don't." "Yes, I do." He turned to face me fully, his expression serious and determined. I spent so many years focusing on what I thought military leadership looked like that I missed what it actually looked like. I missed seeing the real soldier in my own family. Marcus was silent, still processing everything he had heard. But when he finally spoke, his voice was different too, smaller, more uncertain. "Soph, I had no idea. All this time, I thought—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You thought what, Marcus?" "I thought you were just trying to prove something. I thought you picked the Marines because you wanted to show off, not because you actually belonged there." I could have been angry. I could have thrown his years of dismissive comments and condescending jokes back in his face. But looking at him in that moment, seeing him struggle to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the soldier I had actually become, I felt something else entirely. Pity, maybe? Or just sadness for all the time we had wasted. I was never trying to prove anything to you, Marcus. I was trying to serve my country. Mom reached over and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Honey, we're so proud of you. I'm sorry it took so long for everyone to see what I've always known." Dad cleared his throat, clearly struggling with emotions he wasn't used to expressing. "Sophia, General Hartwell mentioned a promotion recommendation. Are you planning to accept it?" "I haven't decided yet, Dad. It would mean more responsibility, possibly a transfer to a new unit." "What would you like to do?" It was such a simple question, but hearing it from him felt revolutionary. For the first time in my military career, Dad was asking about my goals, my aspirations, my vision for my future. Not Marcus's future, not the family legacy as he had imagined it, but what I wanted to accomplish. "I'd like to continue doing what I'm doing, leading Marines, training for difficult missions, serving where the need is greatest." Dad nodded slowly, and I could see him processing this new understanding of who I was and what I represented. "Then, that's what you should do." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the auditorium, General Hartwell approached our family one final time. She handed me a business card with her direct contact information. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, when you're ready to discuss that promotion, give me a call.
There are opportunities in Special Operations Command for someone with your skills and leadership experience. Thank you, ma'am. I'll consider it seriously. She turned to Dad, extending her hand for a final handshake. Colonel Morrison, you raised a warrior, the kind of leader this country needs. After she left, we walked out of the auditorium together, but everything had changed. The dynamics that had defined our relationships for decades had shifted in the space of a single ceremony. Marcus was quiet, contemplative, clearly rethinking everything he thought he knew about military service and family dynamics. Mom was beaming with pride, the kind of expression that comes from seeing your child receive the recognition they had always deserved. And Dad was looking at me with new eyes, seeing not the daughter who had chosen a dangerous path, but the soldier who had excelled on that path. That evening, at the reception following Dad's retirement ceremony, I found myself surrounded by military officers who wanted to hear more about Operation Nightfall, about the rescue mission that had saved 12 lives. The story had spread quickly through the military community, and suddenly I was fielding questions from colonels and generals who were interested in the tactical details of the operation. But the conversation that mattered most happened when Dad pulled me aside, away from the crowd and the congratulations. Sophia, I need you to know something. When I started my military career, I had a very specific idea of what leadership looked like. I thought it was about commanding presence, about being the biggest voice in the room, about inspiring people through sheer force of personality.
I listened, not interrupting, letting him work through thoughts he was probably expressing for the first time. Marcus has that kind of presence, natural charisma, the ability to make people follow him because they're drawn to his confidence. I saw that in him and thought it was the most important quality a military leader could have. Dad paused, looking out at the reception where Marcus was talking with a group of junior officers, still the center of attention even after everything that had happened that day. But what you did in Afghanistan, what General Hartwell described today, that's a different kind of leadership. That's the kind that saves lives. That's the kind that gets impossible things done when everything is falling apart. Dad, Marcus is a good officer. His leadership style works for what he does. You're right, it does. But I made the mistake of thinking it was the only kind that mattered. I made the mistake of not seeing that you had developed something even more valuable. He turned to face me directly, his expression serious and intent. I want you to know that I understand now. The choices you made, the risks you took, the path you chose. You weren't rebelling against the family tradition. You were fulfilling it in a way I was too blind to recognize. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my father truly saw me, not as his daughter who happened to be in the military, but as a military professional who happened to be his daughter. Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. General Hartwell was right about legacy. Mine isn't just about the rank I achieved or the positions I held. It's about raising children who understand what service really means. Today, I learned that I succeeded better than I knew. As the reception continued around us, I realized that this wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. The beginning of a relationship with my father based on mutual respect rather than disappointed expectations. The beginning of a career path that would allow me to use my skills and experience in ways I had never imagined. And maybe, eventually, the beginning of a new understanding with Marcus, one based on who we actually were, rather than who we had thought we were supposed to be. The military had taught me many things over the years: how to lead under pressure, how to make difficult decisions, how to push through physical and mental barriers that would stop most people. But sitting there with my family, finally feeling seen and understood for who I really was, I learned something else. Sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil against enemy forces. Sometimes, they're fought in auditoriums and family dinners and quiet conversations, against assumptions and expectations and the small daily ways that people make each other invisible. I had spent years proving myself to strangers and commanders and fellow Marines who came to respect my abilities through shared hardship and demonstrated competence. But proving myself to my own family had been the longest campaign of all. Marcus approached us as the reception was winding down, his expression more subdued than I had seen since we were children. "Soph, can we talk for a minute?"
Dad excused himself, giving us space for what was clearly going to be an important conversation. "I've been thinking about what happened today," Marcus began, his usual confidence replaced by something more uncertain. "About the things I've said over the years, the way I've treated your service." "Marcus, you don't—" "Yes, I do. I need to say this." He took a deep breath, clearly struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. "I was wrong. About everything. About what you were doing, about why you were doing it, about what it meant." I waited, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. "I think I was threatened by you, by the fact that you were willing to take risks I wouldn't take, go places I wouldn't go, do things I wouldn't do. It was easier to pretend that what you were doing didn't matter than to admit that maybe you were braver than I was." It was the most honest thing Marcus had ever said to me, and probably the most difficult. "You're not a coward, Marcus. You serve in your own way." "Maybe, but I'm not a hero either. Not like you." "I'm not a hero, Marcus. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time with the right training." He shook his head, rejecting my attempt to minimize what I had accomplished. Heroes always say that, but the rest of us know better. As we hugged goodbye that night, I realized that everything had changed, and nothing had changed. I was still the same person I had been that morning, with the same skills and experience and dedication to service. But now my family knew who that person was. Marcus would probably always be the more naturally charismatic leader, the one who advanced more quickly through the ranks and earned recognition for his administrative skills. Dad would probably always see him as the son who had followed the traditional path to military success. But now they also saw me, the daughter who had chosen a harder path and found a different kind of success. The soldier who had earned her place through actions rather than words, through results rather than politics. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. 3 weeks later, I called General Hartwell and accepted the promotion to gunnery sergeant, along with a transfer to Special Operations Command. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my career, one that would give me opportunities to lead and serve in ways I had never imagined. But it was also the continuation of something that had started long before that night in the Afghan mountains. It was the continuation of a legacy that my father had built without knowing it, a legacy of service and sacrifice, and the quiet determination to do what was right even when no one was watching. They had called me their little sister playing soldier. Now they called me Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, and someday they would call me something else, something higher, something that reflected the path I had chosen and the person I had become through walking it. The military had given me many things: discipline, purpose, the skills to lead under pressure and make decisions that mattered. But my family had given me something else, something that took me years to recognize and claim. They had given me the strength to be underestimated, and the 6 months after General Hartlaw's revelation changed everything. I found myself in the most unexpected place of my military career, sitting across from a congressional committee in Washington, D.C.
Being asked to testify about operations I had assumed would remain classified forever. The mahogany-paneled room felt more intimidating than any enemy compound I had ever infiltrated, and the senators staring at me from behind their elevated desk seemed more dangerous than any Taliban fighter I had faced in Afghanistan. The hearing had been called to investigate allegations of misconduct within Special Operations Command, specifically claims that certain rescue operations had been undertaken without proper authorization and oversight. Someone had leaked information about Operation Nightfall to the press, and now Congress wanted answers about who had authorized the mission and whether proper protocols had been followed. I sat in my dress blues, the silver star ribbon visible among the other decorations on my chest, trying to project the same calm confidence I had relied on during combat operations. But this was different. In combat, you knew who the enemy was and what they were trying to accomplish. In this room, everyone was supposed to be on the same side, but the questions felt like incoming fire. Senator Patricia Vance, the committee chairwoman, had been particularly aggressive in her questioning. She was a former prosecutor who had built her political career on exposing government waste and holding military leadership accountable for their decisions. Her reputation for thorough preparation and sharp cross-examination had made her both respected and feared in Washington circles. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, she began, consulting her notes, your testimony indicates that you developed the rescue plan for Operation Nightfall independently, without input from higher command or coordination with other military units in the region. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. I analyzed the intelligence reports and developed a tactical plan based on my assessment of the situation and the available resources. And you presented this plan to Captain Rodriguez, who approved it without seeking authorization from his superiors? I could see where this was heading. Senator Vance was trying to establish that the mission had been conducted outside the proper chain of command, that Rodriguez and I had acted recklessly without considering the broader implications of our actions. Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez had the authority to approve rescue operations within his area of responsibility. The mission fell within the parameters of our standing orders to locate and extract American civilians held by hostile forces. But this particular operation involved crossing into territory that was outside your unit's normal operational area, didn't it? You were operating in a region where other military units had primary responsibility. This was the heart of the controversy. Operation Nightfall had technically crossed jurisdictional boundaries between different military commands, and some officers were claiming that we had interfered with their ongoing operations and intelligence-gathering efforts. Ma'am, the contractors were running out of time. Intelligence indicated they would be moved within 48 hours to a location where recovery would be impossible. Every hour we spent coordinating with other units was an hour those Americans moved closer to disappearing forever. Senator Vance leaned forward, her expression skeptical. So you made the decision to violate established protocols because you felt the situation was urgent? Ma'am, I made the decision to save 12 American lives using the resources and authority available to me. I would make the same decision again. The questioning continued for 3 hours, with different senators taking turns trying to establish whether Operation Nightfall represented successful military leadership or dangerous insubordination. Some seemed genuinely interested in understanding the tactical details of the rescue. Others appeared more focused on scoring political points or protecting their own relationships with senior military officials. Senator James Crawford, a former Army colonel himself, asked more substantive questions about the planning and execution of the mission. He seemed to understand the operational constraints we had faced and the split-second decisions that had made the rescue possible. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, in your professional opinion, what would have happened if you had followed standard protocols and waited for authorization from higher command? Sir, based on the intelligence timeline, the contractors would have been moved to a secondary location before any coordinated rescue operation could have been organized. We would have lost them. And the mountain climbing approach you used, that wasn't something that would have been available to a larger conventional force. No, sir. The route we took required specific technical skills and could only accommodate a small team. A larger operation would have been forced to use the main access routes, which were heavily defended. Crawford nodded, making notes. So the unconventional nature of your approach was actually essential to the mission's success? Yes, sir. Sometimes the situation requires tactics that don't appear in standard operating procedures. After my testimony, I was escorted to a waiting room where I expected to be debriefed and dismissed. Instead, I found General Hartwell waiting for me, along with 2 other officers I didn't recognize. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, she said, standing as I entered, I want you to meet Colonel Sarah Chen from the Pentagon's Strategic Planning Division and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Torres from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I saluted both officers, unsure why they wanted to meet with me immediately after what had felt like a hostile interrogation. Relax, Morrison, General Hartwell said. You're not in trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. Colonel Chen stepped forward, carrying a thick folder marked with security classifications I had never seen before. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, your testimony today was impressive, but more importantly, your actions in Afghanistan have caught the attention of some very senior people in the defense establishment. We'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you. I remained at attention, not sure how to respond. At ease, Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Torres said. This is an informal conversation. We're here to talk about your future, not to give you orders. I relaxed slightly, but remained wary.
In my experience, when senior officers wanted to have informal conversations about your future, it usually meant your life was about to become much more complicated. General Hartwell gestured for everyone to sit around a small conference table in the corner of the room. Morrison, what do you know about the Pentagon's Irregular Warfare Task Force? Very little, ma'am. I've heard references to specialized units that handle unconventional threats, but I don't have clearance for that kind of information. Colonel Chen opened her folder, revealing documents that were heavily redacted but clearly related to military operations around the world. The task force coordinates response to threats that don't fit into traditional military categories: hostage situations, terrorist cells, criminal organizations that pose national security risks, situations where conventional military responses are either impossible or counterproductive. We need people who can think creatively, operate independently, and achieve objectives that others consider impossible, Lieutenant Colonel Torres added. People like you. I looked around the table, trying to understand what they were offering. Are you asking me to join some kind of special operations unit? We're asking you to consider a role that would allow you to do what you did in Afghanistan on a larger scale, General Hartwell explained. You would be leading small teams on high-priority missions that require the kind of tactical innovation and leadership you demonstrated during Operation Nightfall. Colonel Chen slid a document across the table toward me. It was an official transfer order, but the destination was listed simply as Special Assignment, Pentagon. This would mean leaving the Marines? I asked. Technically, you would remain a Marine, but you would be assigned to a joint task force that reports directly to the Secretary of Defense. Your missions would come from the highest levels of government, and your operations would have priority access to intelligence and resources from across the military and intelligence communities.
It was an incredible opportunity, the kind of career advancement that most military professionals could only dream of. But it also meant leaving behind everything familiar, everything that had shaped my identity as a Marine. What kind of missions are we talking about? Lieutenant Colonel Torres leaned forward. The kind that never make it into newspapers, the kind that prevent international incidents instead of causing them, the kind that save lives without anyone ever knowing they were in danger. You would be ghost soldiers, Morrison, General Hartwell said quietly, operating in the shadows, solving problems that conventional diplomacy and military action can't touch. I stared at the transfer order, weighing the implications. This was clearly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it was also a step into unknown territory that would fundamentally change the nature of my military service. Can I have some time to consider this? Of course, Colonel Chen said, but understand that opportunities like this don't come around often. The task force only recruits a few people each year, and they're looking for individuals with very specific qualifications and experience. How long do I have to decide? 2 weeks, General Hartwell replied. After that, the position will be offered to someone else. As I left the Pentagon that afternoon, my mind was racing with possibilities and concerns. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it would mean leaving behind the structure and community that had defined my military career. It would mean operating in a world where the rules were different, where success was measured by objectives that might never be publicly acknowledged. But it would also mean having the resources and authority to make a real difference, to prevent crises instead of just responding to them, to use my skills and experience in ways that could have strategic impact on national security. I called Rodriguez that evening to get his perspective. He had been promoted to major and was now commanding his own company, but we had maintained contact since Operation Nightfall. Morrison, this is exactly what I expected would happen, he said when I described the meeting. You've caught the attention of people who matter. The question is whether you're ready for that level of responsibility. What do you think I should do? I think you should ask yourself what you want to accomplish with your military career. If you want to continue doing what you're doing, leading Marines and executing conventional operations, then stay where you are. But if you want to tackle bigger challenges, solve problems that nobody else can solve, then this sounds like the right opportunity. It's a big risk. I'd be giving up everything familiar. Morrison, everything you've accomplished in your career has involved taking risks that other people thought were too dangerous. This is just the next level. That weekend, I drove home to visit my family. Dad's retirement had been everything he had hoped for.
He was consulting for a defense contractor, writing articles for military journals, and speaking at leadership seminars around the country. Mom was enjoying having him home more, and they had started traveling to places they had never had time to visit during his active duty years. Marcus had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and was commanding a training battalion at Fort Leavenworth. His career was progressing exactly as Dad had always predicted: steady advancement through positions of increasing responsibility and visibility. But the dynamic between us had changed since General Hartwell's revelation at Dad's retirement ceremony. Marcus no longer made dismissive comments about my service, and Dad asked serious questions about my career plans and goals. The competitive edge that had defined our relationship since childhood had been replaced by something more mature, more respectful. Over dinner, I told them about the opportunity with the Irregular Warfare Task Force, leaving out the classified details but explaining the general nature of what I was being offered. Dad listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about the career implications and the kinds of challenges I would be facing. "Sophia, this sounds like the kind of assignment that could define your entire military career, but it also sounds dangerous and unpredictable." "Everything I've done in the Marines has been dangerous and unpredictable, Dad. That's part of the job." "This is different, though. You're talking about operating outside normal military channels, taking on missions that might not have clear objectives or defined endpoints." Mom was more direct in her concerns. "Honey, it sounds like you'd be giving up the community and support structure you've built in the Marines. Would you still have the same kind of relationships with the people you serve with?" It was a good question, one I had been wrestling with myself. The Marines had given me more than just a career. They had given me a family, a sense of belonging, an identity that extended beyond individual missions or achievements. Marcus surprised me by asking the most practical question of all. "Soph, what does your gut tell you? When you think about taking this assignment, do you feel excited or worried?" I thought about it for a moment, trying to identify the emotions I had been feeling since the meeting at the Pentagon. "Both," I admitted. "Excited about the possibilities, worried about the unknowns." "That sounds about right for any significant career decision," Dad said. "The question is whether the excitement outweighs the worry." That night, I walked around the neighborhood where I had grown up, thinking about the path that had brought me to this point. 5 years earlier, I had been a young Marine trying to prove herself worthy of her family's military legacy. Now I was being recruited for assignments that would put me at the center of national security operations. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built through countless small decisions, each one pushing me further outside my comfort zone, each one requiring me to develop new skills and take on greater responsibilities. Operation Nightfall had been the culmination of that process, the moment when everything I had learned came together to accomplish something that mattered. But it had also been a beginning, proof that I was capable of handling challenges that others considered impossible. The next morning, I called General Hartwell and accepted the assignment. 2 months later, I found myself at a classified facility outside Washington, D.C., beginning an intensive training program that would prepare me for operations unlike anything I had experienced in the Marines. The Irregular Warfare Task Force brought together personnel from every branch of the military, plus specialists from intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and even civilian contractors with unique skills. My training partner was Captain Elena Vasquez, a former Navy SEAL whose expertise in underwater operations complemented my mountain warfare background. Our instructor was Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, a former Delta Force operator who had spent 15 years conducting missions in every major conflict zone around the world. "Forget everything you think you know about military operations," Kim told our training class on the first day. "The missions you'll be conducting don't follow conventional rules. Your enemies won't be wearing uniforms, your objectives won't always be clear, and your success will be measured by preventing things from happening rather than making things happen." The training was unlike anything I had experienced. Instead of learning how to work within established military hierarchies, we were taught to operate as autonomous units with minimal oversight.
Instead of following detailed operational plans, we learned to adapt constantly to changing circumstances and incomplete information. We studied international law, cultural anthropology, advanced psychology, and financial systems. We learned to think like criminals, terrorists, and foreign intelligence operatives. We practiced assuming false identities, operating in urban environments without military support, and making decisions with global implications.
But the most challenging aspect of the training was learning to work with people whose backgrounds and perspectives were completely different from my own. Captain Vasquez had spent her career in elite special operations units where individual excellence and team cohesion were the primary values. Agent Sarah Mitchell, a former CIA analyst, approached problems from an intelligence perspective that emphasized information gathering and strategic patience. Dr. James Park, a civilian contractor who specialized in conflict resolution, brought an academic background that sometimes clashed with our military instincts for direct action. Our first major training exercise involved a simulated hostage crisis in an urban environment. Intelligence indicated that a terrorist cell was holding American diplomats in a building in downtown Washington, D.C., but the situation was complicated by the presence of innocent civilians, international media attention, and political pressure to resolve the crisis without violence. Captain Vasquez wanted to conduct a direct assault using techniques from her SEAL training. Agent Mitchell advocated for a surveillance and intelligence gathering approach that would identify the terrorists' weaknesses and motivations. Dr. Park suggested that negotiation and conflict resolution might accomplish our objectives without risking lives. As the team leader, I had to find a way to integrate these different approaches into a coherent strategy that would achieve our mission objectives. I spent 6 hours studying the building layout, the intelligence reports, and the profiles of the suspected terrorists. Then I developed a plan that combined elements from everyone's recommendations. We would use Agent Mitchell's intelligence gathering approach to identify the exact location of the hostages and the number of terrorists. Captain Vasquez would lead a diversionary assault on one side of the building, while I led a smaller team through an alternative entry point. Dr. Park would coordinate with local authorities to establish communication with the terrorists and provide psychological pressure that would support our tactical operations. The exercise was a success, but it taught me something important about leadership in this new environment. Unlike conventional military operations where clear hierarchies and established procedures provided structure, task force missions required a more collaborative approach that drew on everyone's expertise while maintaining focus on the ultimate objective. Lieutenant Colonel Kim's debriefing was characteristically blunt. "Morrison, your plan worked, but it took you too long to develop it. In a real crisis, you won't have 6 hours to analyze the situation and coordinate with your team. You need to be able to make these kinds of decisions faster, with less information, and under more pressure." "Yes, sir. How do I improve that?" "Practice, experience, and trust your instincts more. You have good tactical judgment, but you're still thinking like a conventional military officer who needs to justify every decision through proper channels. In this job, you'll be making decisions that affect national security with minimal oversight and no time for second-guessing." Over the following weeks, our training scenarios became progressively more complex and challenging. We conducted mock operations in foreign countries, dealing with corrupt local officials, unreliable intelligence, and political constraints that limited our options. We learned to operate in environments where military force was not the primary tool, where success required diplomatic skills, cultural sensitivity, and creative problem-solving. The most difficult exercise involved a situation where we were tasked with preventing an international incident without revealing American involvement. A criminal organization was planning to attack a foreign embassy in a way that would be blamed on American intelligence services. Our job was to stop the attack while ensuring that the real perpetrators were exposed and our own government's innocence was established. The scenario required us to work with foreign intelligence services, coordinate with local law enforcement, and manipulate media coverage, all while operating under false identities and maintaining plausible deniability for American involvement. It was the kind of challenge that combined every aspect of our training: tactical skills, intelligence analysis, psychological operations, and strategic thinking. More importantly, it demonstrated the kind of complex, multi-dimensional problems we would be facing in actual operations. During the final week of training, Lieutenant Colonel Kim called me into his office for a private evaluation. "Morrison, you've adapted well to this environment. Your tactical skills are excellent, your leadership instincts are sound, and you've learned to work effectively with people whose backgrounds are very different from your own." "Thank you, sir. But I want to make sure you understand what you're getting into. The missions you'll be conducting are more ambiguous than anything you've done before. There won't always be clear objectives, obvious enemies, or definitive measures of success. He leaned back in his chair, studying my expression. In Afghanistan, you knew who the enemy was and what victory looked like. In this job, you'll be operating in gray areas where the line between success and failure isn't always clear, where the consequences of your decisions might not be apparent for months or years. I understand, sir. Do you? Because the biggest risk for people in your position is losing sight of why they're doing this work. When you're operating in the shadows, when your successes can't be publicized and your sacrifices go unrecognized, it's easy to start questioning whether what you're doing matters. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. Kim was right that this would be different from any military service I had experienced before. But he was also right that it represented an opportunity to make a difference on a scale that conventional military operations couldn't achieve. My first assignment came 3 weeks after graduation from the training program. Intelligence had identified a human trafficking network that was moving kidnapped American citizens through Eastern Europe before selling them to buyers in Central Asia. Local law enforcement was either unable or unwilling to intervene, and diplomatic efforts had been unsuccessful. The task force was tasked with dismantling the network, rescuing the American victims, and gathering intelligence that could be used to prosecute the organizers through international courts. My team consisted of Captain Vasquez, Agent Mitchell, and a new member, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, a former Army intelligence specialist whose language skills and cultural knowledge would be essential for operating in the region. We spent 2 weeks developing our operational plan, studying the intelligence reports, and preparing our equipment and false identities. Unlike Operation Nightfall, which had been planned and executed in a matter of days, this mission required months of preparation and coordination with multiple government agencies. But when we finally deployed, I discovered that all the preparation in the world couldn't fully prepare you for the reality of operating an environment where everyone was a potential enemy and nothing was what it appeared to be. Our first contact was a former police officer who claimed to have information about the trafficking network. He met us in a restaurant in Prague, nervous and constantly checking over his shoulder as he described the organization's structure and methods. They move the Americans through 3 different countries before reaching their final destination, he explained in broken English. Each segment is controlled by different groups who don't know about the others. Very smart, very secure. Agent Mitchell asked detailed questions about timelines, routes, and the number of victims, but something about the man's story didn't feel right to me. His nervousness seemed performed rather than genuine, and some of his details contradicted the intelligence we had received from other sources. After the meeting, I expressed my concerns to the team. I think we're being set up. This guy knows too much about the overall operation for someone who's supposedly just a local contact. Captain Vasquez disagreed. He seems legitimate to me.
Nervous, sure, but that's normal for someone who's risking his life to help us. Agent Mitchell was more cautious. His information does align with some of our other intelligence, but Morrison's right that he seems unusually well-informed. Staff Sergeant Chen had been quiet during the meeting, but now he spoke up. In my experience, when something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. We should assume this is a trap and plan accordingly. I made the decision to proceed with the mission, but to modify our approach based on the assumption that the trafficking network knew we were coming. Instead of following the informant's suggested route to intercept the next shipment of victims, we conducted our own surveillance and identified an alternative approach that would give us better tactical advantage and multiple escape routes. The decision probably saved our lives. When we reached the location where the victims were supposedly being held, we found an empty warehouse and a dozen armed men waiting for us. The informant had indeed been working for the trafficking network, and they had planned to capture or kill us to protect their operation. The firefight that followed was intense but brief. Captain Vasquez's special operations training proved invaluable in the urban combat environment, while Staff Sergeant Chen's intelligence background helped us identify which of our attackers might have useful information. When the shooting stopped, we had captured 3 members of the trafficking network and recovered intelligence that led us to the real location where the American victims were being held. The actual rescue operation took place 2 days later, after we had time to properly plan our approach and coordinate with local authorities who could be trusted. We freed 8 American citizens who had been kidnapped over the previous 6 months and gathered evidence that led to the arrest of dozens of network members across 4 countries. But the mission also taught me important lessons about the nature of the work we were doing. The intelligence we received was often unreliable, The people we worked with had their own agendas, and success required constant adaptation to changing circumstances. More importantly, I learned that leadership in this environment meant making decisions with incomplete information, accepting responsibility for consequences that couldn't be predicted, and maintaining focus on mission objectives even when everything around you was uncertain. When we returned to Washington for debriefing, Lieutenant Colonel Kim's evaluation was characteristically direct. "Good work, Morrison. You identified the trap, adapted your plan accordingly, and achieved all mission objectives with minimal casualties. But you took unnecessary risks during the warehouse engagement that could have compromised the entire operation." "Yes, sir. I should have withdrawn when we realized it was an ambush." "No, you should have planned for the possibility of an ambush from the beginning. In this job, paranoia isn't a character flaw, it's a survival skill." Over the next 18 months, my team conducted 12 operations across 3 continents. We disrupted terrorist financing networks in Southeast Asia, prevented the theft of nuclear materials in Eastern Europe, and rescued American citizens from criminal organizations in South America. Each mission was different, but they all shared common characteristics: ambiguous objectives, unreliable intelligence, hostile environments, and the need to achieve strategic goals while maintaining plausible deniability for American involvement. I learned to think like a criminal, to anticipate betrayal, to operate for months at a time under false identities that became as familiar as my real name. I learned to make decisions that affected international relations, to coordinate with foreign intelligence services, and to balance American interests with broader strategic considerations. But most importantly, I learned that the skills I had developed as a Marine, tactical thinking, leadership under pressure, adaptability in crisis situations, were exactly what this job required, just applied on a different scale and in more complex environments. The work was demanding, often dangerous, and sometimes morally ambiguous. But it was also the most meaningful service I had ever performed, the closest I had ever come to making a real difference in protecting American lives and interests around the world. That was before everything changed with a single phone call that would test everything I had learned about leadership, loyalty, and the price of operating in the shadows, where even your own government might not have your back. The secure phone rang at 3 in the morning, jolting me awake in my apartment just outside Quantico. When you work for the Irregular Warfare Task Force, calls at that hour usually means someone's life hangs in the balance. I answered on the second ring, already reaching for the encrypted tablet that never left my nightstand. "Morrison, we have a situation." Lieutenant Colonel Kim's voice carried the tension of someone who hadn't slept in days. "I need you in the briefing room in 40 minutes, full tactical gear, ready for immediate deployment." "What's the target, sir?" "Your brother." The words hit me like cold water. I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake, my mind racing through possibilities that all seemed impossible. "Sir, I need clarification on that. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Morrison has been taken hostage by a separatist group in Montenegro. They're demanding prisoner exchanges and threatening to execute him along with 2 other American military advisors if their demands aren't met within 72 hours. The briefing room was already crowded when I arrived. Captain Vasquez was studying satellite imagery on the main screen, while Agent Mitchell worked through intelligence reports at a speed that suggested she'd been at it for hours. Staff Sergeant Chen was coordinating with communications specialists, establishing secure links with assets in the region. General Hartwell stood at the head of the conference table, her expression grim but focused. This wasn't just another rescue operation for her. This was personal, and everyone in the room understood the implications. "Morrison, before we begin, I need to ask if you can handle this mission objectively. No one would question your decision to recuse yourself given the family connection." I looked at the satellite photos of the compound where my brother was being held, studying the terrain and defensive positions with the same analytical approach I brought to every mission. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison is an American military officer being held by hostile forces. That makes him a mission objective, not a family member. I can handle this." "Good, because we need your expertise on this one, and we need it fast." The intelligence briefing painted a picture of a sophisticated operation carried out by people who understood American military procedures. Marcus had been in Montenegro as part of a NATO advisory mission, helping to train local forces in counter-terrorism tactics. He and 2 other officers had been conducting a routine inspection of a remote training facility when they were ambushed by a group calling itself the Montenegrin Liberation Front.
The MLF was a relatively new organization that combined traditional separatist goals with more modern tactics. They had been responsible for several bombing attacks against government buildings, but this was their first attempt at taking American hostages. Agent Mitchell had been analyzing their demands. They're asking for the release of 12 MLF members currently being held in Montenegrin prisons, plus a ransom payment of $50 million. But their real objective appears to be international recognition and legitimacy for their political cause. Timeline? I asked. 68 hours remaining. They've been very specific about the deadline, and intelligence suggests they're serious about executing the hostages if their demands aren't met. General Hartwell activated the secure video link that connected us to the Pentagon, the State Department, and the Montenegro government. The political complexities of the situation were immediately apparent. The Montenegro officials were willing to consider prisoner releases, but couldn't make decisions quickly enough to meet the MLF deadline. The State Department was exploring diplomatic solutions, but acknowledged that negotiations would take weeks, not hours. The Pentagon wanted military options, but was constrained by Montenegro's status as a NATO ally and the political implications of conducting combat operations on their territory, which left the Irregular Warfare Task Force with a familiar challenge: accomplish the impossible while maintaining plausible deniability for American involvement. I studied the compound layout while the politicians debated their options. The MLF had chosen their location well, a former Yugoslav military installation built into a mountainside with multiple defensive positions and limited approach routes.
The facility had been abandoned for years, but retained most of its original infrastructure, including underground bunkers and reinforced communications equipment. Captain Vasquez, what's your assessment of a direct assault? Possible, but costly. The approach routes are all exposed, and they have excellent fields of fire from elevated positions. We'd need significant air support and probably a full company of assault troops to guarantee success. Which we can't authorize without Montenegrin approval, General Hartwell added, and that approval process could take longer than we have. Agent Mitchell had been working through the intelligence reports on MLF leadership and discovered something interesting. The operation commander is Viktor Petrov, former Montenegrin army captain who was cashiered 3 years ago for corruption. But the tactical planning shows sophistication that suggests outside assistance. What kind of assistance? Possibly Russian intelligence services. The MLF has been receiving funding and equipment from sources that intelligence can't fully identify, and some of their recent operations show tactical knowledge that exceeds their apparent capabilities. Staff Sergeant Chen looked up from his communications console. I've got intercepts suggesting the Russians are using this situation to test NATO response times and coordination. They may not care about the MLF's political goals, but they're definitely interested in the intelligence value of the operation. The implications were staggering. If Russian intelligence was indeed supporting the MLF, then a rescue operation could escalate into an international incident with consequences far beyond saving 3 American hostages. But Marcus was still my brother, politics aside, and he was still an American officer whose life depended on our ability to find a solution that the conventional military and diplomatic establishments couldn't provide. I had been studying the compound imagery for 2 hours when I noticed something that the initial intelligence analysis had missed. The facility's water supply came from a natural spring that originated higher up the mountain, flowing through a series of underground channels before reaching the main installation. Chen, can you get me geological surveys of this area? I want to know everything about the water system and underground structures. Working on it, Gunny. Captain Vasquez saw where I was heading. You're thinking about an infiltration route through the water system? Maybe, but I need to understand the layout first. The geological data revealed exactly what I had hoped to find. The underground water channels were large enough to accommodate human passage, and they connected to a series of natural caves that extended throughout the mountain. More importantly, the cave system had multiple access points that weren't visible from the compound's defensive positions. But the approach would be extremely dangerous. The water channels were partially flooded, requiring underwater navigation in complete darkness. The cave system was unmapped and potentially unstable, and even if we reached the compound undetected, we would still need to locate and extract 3 hostages from a heavily defended position. Agent Mitchell identified another complication when she finished her analysis of MLF communications.
They're planning to move the hostages in 36 hours. Intelligence suggests they've prepared a secondary location deeper in the mountains, probably in cave systems that would make rescue impossible. General Hartwell convened a secure video conference with senior Pentagon officials to discuss our options. The conversation was frank and sobering. "We have 3 choices," she explained to the assembled officials. "Diplomatic negotiation, that might save the hostages but would take longer than we have and set dangerous precedents for future hostage situations. Military assault, that would guarantee rescue but could destabilize our relationship with Montenegro and provide propaganda victories for Russian intelligence. Or unconventional infiltration, that might succeed but carries extreme risks for the rescue team." Secretary of Defense James Patterson appeared on the main screen, his expression reflecting the weight of the decision. "General Hartwell, what's your recommendation?" "Sir, I recommend the infiltration option. It offers the best chance of rescuing the hostages while maintaining deniability for American involvement. But I want full authorization for the mission commander to adapt tactics as necessary, including the use of lethal force against MLF personnel." "And who would command this operation?" General Hartwell looked directly at me. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison has the technical skills for the infiltration route and the tactical experience for the extraction. More importantly, she has the judgment to make difficult decisions under extreme pressure." Secretary Patterson studied my file on his screen. "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, are you confident you can bring these hostages home?" "Sir, I'm confident I can execute the mission as planned, but rescue operations always involve variables that can't be predicted or controlled. I can promise you that my team will do everything possible to achieve mission success." "That's all anyone can ask. You have authorization to proceed." We had 18 hours to plan and execute the most complex rescue operation of my career. My team would consist of Captain Vasquez, Staff Sergeant Chen, and 2 additional specialists. Petty Officer Second Class Maria Santos, a Navy diver whose underwater expertise would be essential for navigating the flooded portions of the cave system, and Technical Sergeant Andrew Walker, an Air Force pararescue specialist whose medical training might be crucial if the hostages had been injured. The insertion plan called for us to approach the mountain from the north, using climbing techniques to reach the cave entrance approximately 2 miles from the compound. We would then navigate the underground water system to reach infiltration points within the facility's perimeter. The extraction phase was more complex. Once we located the hostages, we would need to neutralize their guards, move them through the cave system to a predetermined extraction point, and signal for helicopter pickup, all while avoiding detection by the remaining MLF forces. Equipment preparation took 6 hours. We packed specialized gear for underwater navigation, cave exploration, and close quarters combat. Everything had to be waterproof, lightweight, and designed for silent operation. The psychological preparation was more challenging. I was about to risk my life and the lives of my team members to rescue my brother, but I couldn't allow family relationships to compromise tactical decision-making. If the mission went wrong, if I had to choose between saving Marcus and protecting my team, I needed to be prepared to make the right choice as a military commander rather than as a sister. Captain Vasquez pulled me aside during final equipment checks. "Morrison, I need to know you're thinking clearly about this. Your brother's life is on the line, but so are ours. I need to know you'll make the right calls when it matters." "Vasquez, if Marcus were any other hostage, how would you rate our chances of success?" "Honestly, maybe 60%. The infiltration route is dangerous, the compound is well defended, and we're operating without backup or air support." "Then that's how I'm approaching this mission. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison is a hostage we're going to rescue, period."
The fact that he's my brother doesn't change the tactical situation. She studied my expression for a moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me." The helicopter insertion went smoothly, dropping us 3 miles from the target in darkness that was complete except for the faint glow of stars. The climb to the cave entrance took 2 hours, moving through terrain that would have been challenging in daylight but was treacherous in the darkness we needed for concealment. Petty Officer Santos took point as we entered the cave system, using specialized equipment to navigate the underwater passages that connected the natural caves to the compound's water supply. The water was cold enough to numb exposed skin within minutes, and the complete darkness created a disorienting environment where distance and direction became difficult to judge. Technical Sergeant Walker developed equipment problems during the third underwater passage when his breathing apparatus began leaking and his underwater communication system failed. In training scenarios, this would have been the point where we aborted the mission and tried again with better equipment. But Marcus didn't have time for us to try again. I made the decision to continue with a 4-person team, leaving Walker at a secure position where he could provide emergency medical support when we returned with the hostages. It meant we would have fewer resources for the extraction phase, but it also meant we could move faster and maintain better operational security. The final approach to the compound took us through natural caves that opened into the facility's lower levels. Staff Sergeant Chen used electronic surveillance equipment to identify guard positions and patrol patterns, while Captain Vasquez and I studied the building layout through thermal imaging. The hostages were being held in separate rooms on the second level of the main building, with guards posted at regular intervals throughout the facility. Intelligence had been accurate about MLF numbers, approximately 40 personnel, armed with modern weapons and organized into professional military units rather than the improvised groups we had expected. Agent Mitchell's assessment had also been correct about Russian involvement. The equipment and tactical positioning showed signs of professional military training that exceeded anything the MLF could have developed independently. The rescue itself required precise timing and flawless execution. We had to neutralize 6 guards simultaneously while avoiding detection by roving patrols, then locate and extract 3 hostages who might be injured or disoriented, all while maintaining situational awareness for potential complications. I assigned Captain Vasquez to neutralize the guards closest to Marcus's location, while I handled the guards near the other 2 hostages. Staff Sergeant Chen would provide overwatch and coordinate our movements through the facility. The operation began at 0300 hours local time, using night vision equipment and suppressed weapons to maintain operational security. We moved through the compound like ghosts, utilizing the building's shadows and blind spots to avoid detection. Captain Vasquez reached Marcus's location first, confirming through hand signals that he was alive and conscious but appeared to have been injured during the initial capture. I located the other 2 hostages, Major Jennifer Walsh and Captain Robert Kim, in adjacent rooms, both conscious but showing signs of physical abuse. The extraction phase should have been routine. We had successfully infiltrated the compound, neutralized the immediate threats, and located all 3 hostages. But as we prepared to move them toward the cave system, everything went wrong. MLF communications intercepts revealed that they had detected our presence and were organizing a facility-wide search. Worse, they had called for reinforcements from their secondary positions, meaning we would soon be facing overwhelming numbers in a confined space with limited escape routes. Staff Sergeant Chen's voice came through my earpiece, calm but urgent. "Morrison, we've got vehicles approaching from the main access road, multiple contacts, heavy weapons, estimated arrival in 15 minutes. I had to make a decision that would determine whether we all went home or whether some of us didn't make it out at all. The cave route we had used for infiltration would take too long for extraction, especially with injured hostages who couldn't move at full speed. The main access routes were about to be flooded with MLF reinforcements, and we had no air support or backup forces to provide covering fire. But there was a third option, one that violated every principle of tactical operations but might be our only chance for success. Vasquez, Chen, new plan. We're going to fight our way out through the main gate." Captain Vasquez's response was immediate. "Morrison, that's suicide. We're outnumbered 10-1 and they control all the high ground. Not if we make them think we're a much larger force than we actually are." I outlined my plan quickly, knowing that hesitation would doom us all. We would create multiple diversions throughout the compound, using explosives and automatic weapons fire to suggest the presence of a full assault team. While MLF forces responded to the apparent attack, we would move the hostages through the chaos toward the extraction point where Technical Sergeant Walker was waiting with emergency medical equipment. It was the kind of plan that looked insane on paper, but might work if executed with perfect timing and a considerable amount of luck. The next 20 minutes were a blur of controlled violence and tactical improvisation. We moved through the compound creating carefully orchestrated chaos, using smoke grenades and explosive charges to mask our actual numbers and positions. Captain Vasquez proved why SEALs had a reputation for effectiveness in close-quarters combat, neutralizing multiple targets while providing covering fire for our movement. Staff Sergeant Chen's intelligence background proved invaluable as he used his knowledge of MLF communication frequencies to spread false information about our force size and objectives.
But it was Marcus who surprised me most. Despite his injuries, he moved with the tactical awareness of an experienced combat officer, helping to coordinate the other hostages and even providing covering fire when we encountered unexpected resistance. For the first time in our lives, we were working together as equals, as professional soldiers focused on a common mission rather than siblings competing for parental approval. The extraction point was a natural clearing approximately 1 mile from the compound, where our helicopter support could land briefly to pick us up. But reaching it required crossing open ground while MLF forces organized pursuit from multiple directions. Technical Sergeant Walker had used his medical training to stabilize Major Walsh, who had suffered a concussion during her initial capture. Captain Kim was mobile but weak from dehydration and stress. Marcus had taken shrapnel wounds during the firefight but was functional enough to move under his own power. The helicopter appeared exactly on schedule, a testament to the professionalism of the pilots who were risking their lives to extract us from an increasingly dangerous situation. As we loaded the hostages and prepared for departure, MLF vehicles reached the perimeter of the clearing and began engaging us with automatic weapons fire. Captain Vasquez and I provided covering fire while the others boarded, using the helicopter's armored hull for protection while return fire sparked off the aircraft surfaces. The pilot maintained position despite the incoming rounds, holding steady until we were all aboard and ready for departure. As we lifted off, I could see MLF reinforcements converging on the compound from multiple directions. If we had attempted the extraction 30 minutes later, we would have been facing overwhelming odds with no chance of success. The flight back to friendly territory took 40 minutes, during which Technical Sergeant Walker worked to stabilize the injured hostages, while the rest of us conducted preliminary debriefings through secure communications. The mission had been a success by any objective measure. All hostages rescued, no friendly casualties, minimal political complications for American interests in the region. But the personal implications were more complex. Marcus and I had worked together as professional soldiers for the first time in our lives, and the experience had revealed capabilities and character traits that neither of us had recognized before. During the flight, he pulled me aside for a conversation that was long overdue. "Soph, I need you to know something. What you did tonight, the way you planned and executed this operation, that was some of the finest military leadership I've ever witnessed. Marcus, you performed well under fire yourself. Dad would be proud of how you handled the situation. Dad doesn't need to be proud of me. He's been proud of me my whole life, sometimes for things I didn't earn." Marcus paused, looking out at the darkness below us. "But he should be proud of you. What you've accomplished, the soldier you've become, that's something real. We both serve in our own ways." "No, that's not true."
I've been playing at being a soldier while you've been living it. There's a difference, and tonight made that clear. The conversation continued during the medical evaluation and debriefing process that followed our return to base. For the first time, Marcus asked serious questions about my training, my missions, my goals for continued military service. And for the first time, I saw him as something other than the golden child who had always received recognition I felt I deserved. He was a good officer who had served honorably within his capabilities, but he was also someone who had been living up to expectations rather than discovering his own potential. The hostage situation had forced him to confront the difference between perception and reality, both about himself and about me. 3 days after the rescue, General Hartwell called me into her office for a final evaluation of the mission and a discussion about my future with the task force. "Morrison, the Montenegro operation was exceptional work. You adapted to changing circumstances, made difficult decisions under extreme pressure, and achieved complete mission success despite enormous tactical challenges." "Thank you, ma'am. My team performed exceptionally well." "They did, but leadership starts with the mission commander. You've demonstrated that you're ready for greater responsibilities and more complex assignments." She handed me a folder marked with security classifications that were higher than anything I had seen before. "I'm recommending you for promotion to Chief Warrant Officer and assignment as a team leader for the task force's most sensitive operations. These would be missions that report directly to the National Security Council with authority to coordinate across all military and intelligence agencies." It was an extraordinary opportunity, the kind of career advancement that would put me at the center of America's most critical national security operations. But it was also a commitment to a life of constant danger, uncertain outcomes, and moral ambiguity that would define my identity for years to come. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the recommendation. When do you need a decision?" Take your time, Morrison, but understand that opportunities like this don't come around often, and the country needs people who can handle impossible situations. That evening, I called my parents to update them on Marcus's rescue, leaving out the classified details but explaining that he had been safely recovered and was receiving medical treatment for minor injuries. Dad's response surprised me. "Sophia, I don't know exactly what you did to bring your brother home, but I know it wasn't conventional military operations. I also know that Marcus told me you saved his life and the lives of 2 other American officers. Dad, it was a team effort. I just happened to be the mission commander." "No, honey, it was more than that. Marcus said you demonstrated the kind of leadership that he spent his whole career trying to develop. He said you made decisions that he wouldn't have been capable of making." There was a pause before Dad continued. "I owe you an apology that's years overdue. I spent so much time focusing on Marcus's potential that I missed your actual achievements. You've become the kind of soldier I always hoped to be." "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me." But the conversation that mattered most came when Marcus called me directly, several days after his medical clearance and return to duty. "Soph, I've been thinking about our conversation on the helicopter, about the differences between playing soldier and being one. I want you to know that I'm putting in for a transfer to a combat unit. Marcus, you don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to earn something. For the first time in my career, I want to serve where the need is greatest, rather than where the advancement opportunities are best." It was a decision that would change the trajectory of his military service, moving him from the administrative and training roles where he had always excelled into operational positions that would test his capabilities in new ways. But it was also a recognition that military service was about more than career advancement or family expectations. It was about finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself, even when that contribution required sacrifices that others might not understand or appreciate. 6 months later, I accepted General Hartwell's recommendation and began my new assignment as a Chief Warrant Officer in the task force's most classified division. My first mission involved preventing a nuclear incident in Eastern Europe, working with assets from multiple intelligence agencies to neutralize threats that conventional military forces couldn't address. Marcus completed his transfer to the 75th Ranger Regiment and deployed to Syria, where he led combat operations against ISIS forces. His commanding officer's evaluation noted his exceptional tactical leadership and uncommon courage under fire. Dad started a military leadership blog where he wrote about the importance of recognizing potential in all forms, not just the ones that fit traditional expectations. His most popular post was titled "The Daughter I Didn't See," describing his journey from overlooking my capabilities to recognizing them. The family dynamics that had defined our relationships for decades evolved into something more mature and honest. We were no longer competing for parental approval or trying to fulfill expectations that had been imposed from outside. We were 3 people who had found their own paths to meaningful service. During Marcus's next leave, we met for dinner at a restaurant near the Pentagon. The conversation was relaxed, professional, focused on shared experiences rather than sibling rivalry. "You know what I've learned," Marcus said as we were finishing dessert? "Military service isn't about being the person everyone expects you to be. It's about becoming the person the mission needs you to be." That's a hard lesson for most people to learn. It took me almost getting killed to figure it out, but maybe that's what it takes sometimes. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me from the daughter who couldn't throw a baseball to the officer who rescued her brother from enemy territory. It hadn't been a straight line or an easy path, but it had led to a place where my capabilities were recognized and my contributions mattered. The military had taught me many things: tactical leadership, strategic thinking, the importance of teamwork and preparation. But my family had taught me something equally valuable: the importance of perseverance when others don't see your potential, and the satisfaction that comes from proving yourself through actions rather than words. 6 years later, when I was promoted to major and assigned to command a joint task force responsible for counterterrorism operations worldwide, the ceremony was attended by my entire family. Dad sat in the front row, beaming with pride that was genuine rather than performative. Mom cried tears of joy that reflected years of quiet support finally being vindicated. And Marcus, now a lieutenant colonel with his own distinguished combat record, was the one who pinned the new rank insignia on my uniform. As he stepped back and rendered a crisp salute, I realized that we had both found what we were looking for, just not in the ways we had expected.
The little girl who had been dismissed as someone playing soldier had become a soldier who played for keeps, in missions that mattered, with stakes that couldn't be higher. The recognition was satisfying, but the work itself was the real reward. The knowledge that every operation prevented crises, saved lives, and protected interests that extended far beyond personal achievement. They had called me their little sister playing soldier. Now they called me Major Morrison, and the next chapter of my military career was just beginning, with challenges that would test everything I had learned about leadership, sacrifice, and the price of serving something greater than yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.